Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that my book, Drummers on Drumming, is available now on Amazon as both a paperback and an ebook. Based on the Big Fat 5 segment of this podcast, where I sit down with my favorite drummers to discuss the 5 records and stories that shaped their approach to the instrument, this book is packed with insights from the drummers who redefined how we think about the modern drum set. You can grab your copy now by checking the link in this episode's show notes or simply searching Drummers on Drumming on Amazon. So thank you for all the support, and now let's get into the show. Hello. Welcome back to Big Fat 5, a podcast financially supported by Big Fat Snare Drum and a proud member of the Drum Click Podcast Network. My name is Ben Hilsinger, and this week's guest is Guy Licata. Guy is most recently known as the founder of Reflexx practice pads, now the Zildjian Reflexx conditioning pad, so big congrats to Guy for that partnership. It's incredible and more than well-deserved, but Guy is more than just a business owner, he's a master player. And yes, Guy, I'm going to say master. While he's a very sought-after teacher himself, Guy has studied with the greats including Jim Chapin and Jojo Mayer, which we get into all that in this episode. But he's played with countless artists over the years, including Museum of Love, fronted by LCD Sound System's Pat Mahoney, Santi Gold, Head Automatica, Shakira, RAC, Fisher Spooner, and many, many more. He's a fountain of energy and has a passion for talking drums that makes my job as a podcast host very easy. Guy also prepared Emmy Award-winning actor Riz Ahmed for his role as a drummer in the Amazon studio film Sound of Metal. He was tasked with all aspects of drum set instruction and preparation for the role over an intense 7-month period, with Riz having almost no formal experience as a drummer. We discussed all that as a part 2 of our conversation coming out at a later date, but for the time being, please enjoy my conversation with Guy as he dissects the top 5 influences that shaped the way he approaches the instrument. We talked for a while prior to pushing record, so you're jumping into a moving train right off the bat. Cheers.
You know, this question, like, this is Sophie's choice. You know, like, I have so many influences and so many different things that it's like, I wish I could just be like, oh yeah, it's Bonham, you know, Deal Pert, this, that, and kind of go through it. Or it was this, and not to say people who can do that are better or worse or otherwise. It's just like, to me, this was almost an indecent proposal. It was like, oh, how am I going to split the baby and how am I going to parse through this? But when you framed it, you know, in the email where it says, okay, the story that shapes the way you approach the instrument, I'm like, oh, that super broad thing I could actually deal with and kind of get through. And like I was telling you, you know, it's like, to me, what that really speaks to is, you know, it's about identity, right? And that is a heavy thing, right? If you really want to take it to those ends, you know, it's something we grapple with consciously and subconsciously all the time. You know, it's something we hang our hat on and it gives us solace and security in ourselves. But it can also completely box us in or pull the rug out from under us, you know, and, you know, it brings us together, tears us apart, the way we define ourselves versus the way other people define us. You know, but I feel like if you're able to like zoom out and really take a look at your own experience more objectively, you know, that could be life-changing. And I feel like we do it different ways. Sometimes it's through self-discovery just by accident. You know, sometimes like something triggers a panic attack and you're like, oh, wow, might need to mind that a little bit, right? Or
Yeah, exactly.
Like, or we go to therapy and these things happen. But, you know, it's interesting. It's something that me and Riz talked about a lot when we were working on Sound of Metal, because that movie's really about identity. You know, it's through the lens of a drummer who loses his hearing. But when I read through that script, I was just in tears, like, throughout it, because it really, aside from being able to relate to the character, we all, like, the way we define ourselves, the way that stuff works, and then the universe just throws something at you. In this case, he was a musician, he was a drummer. It was all audible, and then he had to completely figure out how to be himself, right outside of that or without that. And I feel like a lot of us struggle with that, and sometimes we know we're going through it and sometimes we don't. And a lot of the students I've gotten through the years, you wind up life coaching, and I think that's a good thing. I really feel like the how and the what are great without the why. And this is something, Benny Greb talks about this, tons of people, Simon Sinek, kind of getting into that. So when, we're talking about whatever it is we're going to talk about, it really reminded me like, oh, I've done this with students and friends to kind of really dig deep, into why are we doing this, right? Because some people walk in and be like, okay, this is what I want to work on. And it started happening enough to where I was like, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm just going to ask you why, and I'm going to keep doing it. And it's wildly frustrating for a lot of people because it's like talking to a 4-year-old, like it's like that. And once I got an answer, I keep drilling down, but really what it's about is aligning your goals, or what you think are your goals, with your intentions. And that stuff gets really obfuscated through the years. And what's it all in service of, right? So kind of going back and doing the deep dive, and it's like a past life regression. And you're really looking at and cleaning up the timeline, because what happens more than not is we have the story we tell ourselves. And that goes for all of life, right? How memories get conflated. And, especially doing it for this in particular, this was like an annual report. You go back as you get older, and you're kind of like, oh, wait, no, that didn't happen in 1997. That happened in like 2002. And in my mind's eye, I was just completely confusing these things. And sometimes it's like a bummer, right? You're like, oh, I really thought, this is happening here. And other times it's like, oh wow, this is great to know. I know thyself, in that sense. But so I wound up putting these exercises together. I put myself through it again for this, and it's actually really simple on the surface. The first part is kind of chopping up like these periods of your life. It's kind of like what we were talking about, that pitchfork thing, 5, 10, 15, 20, where they talk to artists and they talk about their experiences and influences through that time. And then you kind of put it through another filter, right? Which is qualifying the influence or the experience. And when I say qualify, it's not good or bad, right? It's not like, oh, this is a shitty quality snare drum, this is a good one. It's like why you liked these things and why and how they influenced you, right?
Sure.
So those big buckets, and this is not hard and fast. This is all just a framework to kind of work within, and they all inform each other. But it's like cultural influence, right? So like historical, geographical, social, and familial factors that affect you. So like, I'll never forget, I was at the Drummers Collective, I was going to school there, and I just heard this insanity coming from a practice room. And everyone's poking their heads in, and like into the window to see who it is. And I just opened the door, and I was like, yo, who are you? And he's like, yo, man, I'm Chris Coleman. I'm from Saginaw, Michigan. And I was like, what are you doing? And he says, I'm just praising God. And I was like, okay, I should look into that. Yeah. But it just shows like when you come up through the church, or you're like all those things, I didn't do that. So the way those influences work, culturally, it could be a musical parent, right? Mm-hmm. It's like someone like Nate Wood. I remember being younger, and anyone whose parents were musicians, I was like, you don't count. Like, you had an unfair advantage. Yeah. And now I have a musical child, so...
It's like the equivalent to a trust fund baby. Like, come on, man. Start on third base.
It's not fair,
Yeah.
But I've been working with her, that R&B artist, and similar thing. Wildly musical family, tons of support like that. And these cultural influences could also work the other way. If you had someone, a teacher, a parent, like if your folks forced you to practice, right? If it was their idea for you to play an instrument and they're clocking your hours, and you maybe you did like the instrument, but now you don't, and you create these associations with people or types of music and all these things. So that's kind of cultural. Emotional, like, these are the things that are a feeling. This is stuff. These are things in your body, right? You're emoting. Joy, anger, sadness, triumph, envy, stuff that kind of bypass your operating system, right? You're not really thinking. It's just kind of processing in this pure way. And then you got intellectual influences. These are things that tickle and expand your brain. Sometimes they'll be confusing. Sometimes it's like finding a missing piece of a puzzle, right? Sometimes it's like finding a brand new puzzle to put together. It could be inspiring, it could be expanding or aspirational. And those three kind of buckets is how when I go back to look at influences or ask people, what's pushing this? What's pushing this intention or this thing you want to do or this thing you think you want to do? And some people, again, it's like, do you go to the gym to look good on the beach, or is it functional? Like, what are you doing, right? And there's no wrong answer. Like, that's the thing, but just really be in touch with what it is. If someone's like, yeah, I need faster hands, and I go, why? And they're like, I want to get more attention when I go to Guitar Center. That's fine. That's your, like, if you're in touch with that, it's like totally cool. And then someone else is like, oh, I have a gig. I can't hit this pattern. It's just impossible. I need to get there. I need to keep the gig, right? or we want to take this out of the track, and I don't have the coordination to do it. Again, way more functional, but at the same time, there's no wrong answer. As long as you're in touch with it, you're going to see the growth way more efficiently that way, right?
Those questions are the scariest things to answer. Like, as you're talking, I'm like dissecting the things that I do when I sit down and my intentions, and it's just I don't want to ask myself why I do these things, because then it totally disorients everything.
Right, because in a perfect world, we like what we like because we like it, right?
Yeah.
That's it. It feels good. It doesn't feel good. And there's this one New Yorker cartoon, you might have seen it. It's a guy in front of a piano, and the title is How You Know You're a Professional, and in the thought bubble, it's the guy's just thinking, I don't enjoy this at all anymore, right?
Scaringly relatable, yeah.
Right, yeah, because it's like, at one point, this turned into work. And that was the dream, right? So we support ourselves, we get paid doing what we love, traveling the world, whatever it may be. And they've done studies where they say, as soon as you get paid to do something you love, you like it less. That's, kind of part and parcel, and we all deal with that in different ways, consciously and unconsciously. And, you can go back to gratitude, but there's some times where there are people that just get out and retool and do something new. And I'm one of those people. I've kind of kept one leg in playing and teaching, but entrepreneurship and meeting Chris was incredible because there were so few people. There's a handful of us. I call us the kids table. Who aren't these major manufacturers who were scrappy and came up and did something. And we're also players. Scott, another one at Tackle. And going through the pandemic, I was just so grateful for. There was a time when I was like, I'd really like to be on the road in Barcelona right now. That would be really great to be eating tapas and getting paid, to play for people who are excited to see me. Mm-hmm. But what caused the shift, in my career and like my path really saved me in a lot of ways. And I had a lot of survivor's guilt as I watched all my friends kind of freak out and figure out how to retool and do all that stuff. Again, I was fortunate because I, make a product that was very conducive to a pandemic for drummers. It was a quiet practice pad, right?
Yeah.
Not all businesses fared as well, but I was lucky with that. But yeah, man. So that's kind of the way I went through, these 5 things. And, that was the other thing. It kind of worked out because I was looking for those inflection points where it was a cultural influence, an emotional influence, and an intellectual influence, like all hitting at the same time. And from there, those were the turning points. And what happened in between, you kind of qualify in different ways. You're like, oh, I didn't I got into jazz. I actually got into jazz through funk. Like it wasn't this very linear thing. And I got into, like we'll talk about these as we go through them. It's like I got into this player who was more contemporary or this scene through this scene. This was an influence of this drummer, and I would never have gone into it if I wasn't obsessed with them, right?
Sure.
And it's funny how it works, because we are these composites of our influences and the people who influence them, right? So you kind of get this aggregate, in the end, and we're these cheat sheets of all of them in a lot of ways. But yeah, this was
couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I know. I kind of want this, like your soliloquy, just then to be like the cover letter for the podcast, if that was even a thing, to be like going into these. This is what you should know, because that was beautifully said. So.
Oh, thank you.
It's almost like you're a teacher. You should teach, guy. But all right, let's just hop into number one. And
sure.
I don't know any of these, so
cool.
this is exciting for me.
Exciting. Yeah.
So if you have the list in front of you, if you just want to, I'm probably going to butcher some of the names, so I'm going to relinquish it to you.
Sure. So the first one is the Headhunters, and the track is "God Make Me Funky." This came out in 1975. So this is, I think a lot of people might know Herbie Hancock Headhunters. So they're from the East Bay. Mike Clark, Paul Jackson, Benny Maupin, Bill Summers, he was another one. So this came out in 75, and for me, this was, a huge cultural influence. So this is 5 to 10, 5 years old to 10 years old. And I'm 43 years old. So I know vinyl, I know tapes, I know CDs, I know MP3s, I know streaming, right? But so those were sort of the formats. But when you're little, you don't really have agency, right? You're just kind of like in the car with your mom and Debbie Gibson's on, or these things like pop cultural things that are just kind of fed into you and you're around them. And maybe you like them, maybe you don't, but you can't really be like, if your mom likes that Debbie Gibson song, you're not, you don't exactly get to change the radio. But the one area of agency, and it's funny because like format culture, tapes were in the car a lot of the time. So when you're at home, it was the radio, but mostly the radio. I remember when the CD player came out, right? And CDs were like $25. So we got this brand new stereo with the CD player, and my parents were like, okay, there's 4 CDs. It's like Anita Baker, Billy Joel, Kitaro, this crazy synth artist from Japan. It was wild because there wasn't a lot on the format, and my folks were just like, okay. Sure. And that would have added up to like $100, and in 1985 or 1984, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I wound up going through my mom's record collection. She was mostly the music buyer, and it was all over the place. There was some rock stuff, there was some jazz stuff, there was fusion, there was pop. She had a lot of Donovan in there. Not my thing. But I remember just going through it because this was something I was allowed to do, and there was a lot of it. And I remember looking at this cover, and it's kind of scary. It's got like the Headhunters, like this font, and it's kind of creepy. I was like, what's this? And I put it on, I dropped a needle, and I was younger than 10. And it just came on, and it hit me. It was, and it confused me in this way, where it starts out, and we'll play through it, it starts out with this just straightforward groove, and then going into the chorus, it goes into this linear thing. And at that age, I didn't know what was going on, but I remember in that moment, I felt it like slip under my feet, like the syncopation and the displacement and all these things, and it just tickled me. It was just like, ooh, like what's that? And then it would come back. And that was really the magic of Mike Clark and Paul Jackson. They are just an institution, and they really, along with the other guys in the East Bay, Garibaldi and all those folks that were working out of there, they invented this thing. And, many times replicated, never duplicated. I said that wrong. That stuck with me, and I remember doing that. I remember at this time, it was that, and she had like Coltrane the Believer, and I remember putting that on and being like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, this is not settling. Right. And then we had this thing called Mousercise, which was like the Disney exercise vinyl. So it'd be all these wild things, kind of converging.
Mousercise.
Yeah, look it up.
Sure,
I think there's something called Disco Duck on there. Yeah, but so...
These are all like Coachella band names nowadays.
Oh my God. But yeah, man, so this hit hard, and this was the first time kind of all those as close as I could get. Like culturally, this was my family, right? Intellectually,
Sure.
and it hit me in my bones. But yeah.
Sure, all right. Yeah, so God Made Me Funky by the Headhunters. Did you say that was Paul Jackson on bass?
Yeah.
Wow.
So all the guys that were in the Herbie band, or Mike, most of them went over to play with Herbie for Thrust. I believe Manchild was them as well.
Wow.
Flood, which is the live, the live version of Thrust. Yeah, man, that one still hits. It's still, it was funny. I went through this list and played through it behind my kit the other day, like in the order. Mm-hmm. And it was like, it was so emotional. Like it all worked. It all still, each one hit in that same way. And it was, I don't want to say it was validating, but it was sort of like, no, this is the juice, right? These are those points. And I feel like those are the anchors, as we go through just life and art, having a handle on those things, because it brings you back, right? To those times, and just kind of reinforces, who we are, right? Our identity, and not our image, not how people perceive us, but this is me, and again, as you go back through these things, you can find the similarities and the patterns, right? And as we go through here, you'll see, you'll kind of see, the through line with all that stuff, and everyone has one,
Yeah.
But it's, really it's, what is it? Is it displacement? Is it syncopation? Is it this? Is it that? We'll touch on all of it as we get through here, but there's this Neil Peart quote: "Self-plagiarism is style, but repetition is death," right?
Oh, that's good.
So living somewhere in between those two things. But yeah, man. So
yeah, I mean, he's the king of motifs. He references himself all the time. So that's of course a great Neil quote.
Yeah. So
yeah, man, that bass part too. I mean, that's the quintessential thinking about the length of notes, not just what you're playing, but he was holding things out, and then when the chorus came, super staccato. That'd be fun to play with that bass player. I don't know if he's still around or not, but that would be awesome.
He just passed.
Okay.
Yeah, but he's, the way we talk about chemistry, it's like him and Mike were. It kind of couldn't have happened any other way, right?
Sure.
It was powered by vibes in some ways, but just faith. Like they leaned on each other and never worried about each other, and were just operating. I say it a lot. It's like operating outside of the OS, the operating system. What is it? Vinny calls it moving faster than the speed of thought, right? Really being a conduit for the music. And
that explains my stutter. Then I'll just be like, I'm just trying to be Vinny.
Yeah, man.
All right. Well, moving on to number 2. Take it away.
Oh yeah, hard left turn. So Primus, Jerry was a race car driver, right? So this is like ages 10 to 15. So around this time, living in New York, listening to mostly rock. The first tape I bought with my own money was Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, and the only reason I was allowed to was because I was at a friend's birthday party. His mom was driving us to see Top Gun in the theater.
Oh, wow.
And she was letting us listen to it in the car with like all the profanities. And so I got home and I was like, Mom, Jerry's mom let us listen. She goes, okay. Like that's, you can have
if
that.
Jerry's mom said it's fine.
It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. It was just so wild. I remember that day so well because we're in the movie and then there's that one love scene, with this like going on, and it's sort of risque. And as a 10-year-old, you're just like, I am an edgelord right now. You're like, I am living. Like this is it. Like I got profanity over here, right? So out of that time, grunge happened. So like junior high, like middle school, junior high, Seattle happened. And talk about formats. The way I was really, again, you're young. You don't really have money, right? Like you're either inheriting things from family or whatever friends have stuff. But MTV was how I discovered, how a lot of us, just discovered music. I'm sort of this in-between generation. I'm 1978, so I'm like the youngest Gen Xer. My sister, she's 83, she's a millennial, right? So we kind of ride this fence, but, so MTV was big and Nirvana was happening, and that was just exploding. Dave Grohl, huge influence, that band, Soundgarden, Matt, Pearl Jam, playing through all those things. I started really playing drums at 10, but MTV was really the thing, and the Jerry video popped up on 120 Minutes, with Matt Pinfield, and it was this weird video, and the music was so confusing, but heavy, but quirky. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Like I couldn't figure out what instrument was making what sound and how. You kind of get a hint where you see Les's hands, tapping a 6-string fretless bass, which I didn't know existed either at the time. The roles are totally changed. Larry Lalonde, in almost like a Fripp kind of, textural way of playing. Hilariously, he was one of Steve Vai's students. And then Herb, Tim Alexander. And this just broke my brain. It was just its own thing. Like Primus, to this day, they have their own iTunes category tag. Like they don't fit anywhere. So it's really wild.
That's true.
Oh yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's an ISRC or what, but
wow.
Yeah. And so through that time, and I was listening to a lot of stuff, but again, this is where the cultural, emotional, and intellectual thing, because there were so many things going on. And again, I think the ongoing theme here is sort of like it confused me, right? I was
Sure, yeah.
in a way, but I wanted to know more. It wasn't like, that's confusing and that sounds like a test, right? It was like, I gotta understand this. So I became obsessed with her and the band. Saw them a bunch of times. I think the first time I saw them was opening for Rush in the Roll the Bones tour.
Oh, wow. What a bill.
Wild. And I think half the tour was them. I'm trying to think. Maybe there was a Counterparts tour where like Candlebox opened. You know, like,
Man.
it was like, it was wild. But really looking at what Tim was doing, listening to the sounds, you know, and again, there was funk in there, or there was aesthetics. There was tapping and popping and all these things. His drum sound, you know, he was playing a 13-inch piccolo. There were all these things going on. At the time, he was playing 20 by 20 kick drums. Super weird. And I was so obsessed, I wrote a letter to Bill Dedamore at Pork Pie with a pen on paper with my, like, you know, 11 or 12-year-old chicken scratch. And I was like, I really want to buy that drum set. Can you send me some information on this? He wrote me back. And he sent, like, with a price list and 35 millimeter pictures of Herb's kit and all these things. And I looked at the price list, and like a kick drum was like $3,500, and I just died inside. I was just like, it's never gonna happen. I'm never gonna be Herb the Ginseng drummer. So we found our way around that. But yeah, I was so obsessed with this band and everything about them. But yeah, so this was sort of teen years, and again, this is one of those things where getting into him, that's how I got into Rush. That's how I got into the Police, you know, all those bits, and kind of going down those roads and finding their influences and going into that stuff, listening to prog, listening to more punk stuff, you know, going the other way from the Police, right? Listening to more reggae, right? Because of the Police. That was the other thing. But yeah, that's kind of the story there. I've yet to meet him yet. That's the next one. You know, Tim, if you're out there, tell me when and where. I'll hop on a plane. Let's hang.
I'm sure we'd have to invite Gunnar too. He would love that. So.
We were just talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Jerry was a race car driver.
So bizarre, right?
Yeah.
It's so, and it's funny. It's like Les sounds like a carnival barker or an auctioneer. You know, it's like it's effective, but it had that wink. You know, it was funny. It wasn't taking itself too seriously, but it was deathly serious at the same time. And for an adolescent, you know, that was ticking all the boxes. It was, you know, at the same time I was getting into Mr. Bungle. I don't know if you remember Green Jello, which I guess they had to change their name to Green Jelly because they got sued by the Jello people. Danny Carey played in that band. Yeah, there are all these weird all these really weird things happening in the early 90s that were literally just coming through MTV. And they were really doing interesting stuff. You know, like you had Headbangers Ball with Ricky Rackman, and that was metal, right? You had 120 Minutes. You had something called Amp, which was a lot of dance music and rape culture stuff. That happened a little bit later, if you could stay up late enough. Yeah, but you know, it's funny. I was listening to his drum sound in particular recently, and I went back in, just kind of looking at pictures of his kit. They were concert toms. You know, that was another whole. You know, now you see he'll do that thing where they'll cut out the ring on the reso and just stick the mic up there to kind of. Okay. Yeah, so they're not true concert toms. They have heads on them.
Some resonance, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, man.
Yeah, Primus too. It's like at the beginning of starting that band, or was Was he one of the original drummer, Primus?
No, Jay Lane, another killer player. It was him. There was a guy named Todd Huth who I think he played guitar. But yeah, so it was Jay Lane, then it was Tim, then it was Brain for a bit, and then Tim came back, and Tim has his own band Laundry, and a couple other things, and he played on the he played a track on the first Perfect Circle record with Maynard.
Yes. Yeah.
He did that, a couple other things, but his own the parts. I don't know anyone who plays parts like that anymore. His use of double bass, that it wasn't just, not there's anything wrong with just blasting, doing this. It was these really interesting parts that were happening there. The ice bell, ting, which we all know in its own meme format now. But that Octobans, I'll send you a picture of my kid in like 1993, and you're gonna laugh because it's just a rack with it's like 3 up, 2 down, Octobans over here, just borrowing everything I could from my high school band room that they would let me take over the summer to just very Jason Segel and Freaks and Geeks, that kind of thing. But
mine was very generic for being a middle schooler in late 90s, early 2000s. Everything was Travis Barker, super flat. Cymbals were like 5 feet over my head. Me and every other drummer that I knew. So
totally.
We all get stylized. But let's just move on to number 3.
Let's do it. So this is Past the Peas, and this is Maceo Parker live. Record's called Life on Planet Groove. The original, so this was actually written by the JBs, and this came out in 1972. Jabbo Starks was on that. So Maceo was actually in the JBs. He was in James Brown's band. He wasn't on this recording, the original recording. The drummer on this version that we're going to listen to is Kenwood Denard, and he's an absolute genius. A brilliant player. Worked a lot in the jazz world. I think a lot of drummers know him. And a lot of bass players know him because he was on Jaco Pastorius's instructional video, right? I don't know if you've ever seen that. Yeah, at the end where Jaco throws the bass and Kenwood catches it, But he, the way he approaches the instrument, and he has his own instructional video, which is fascinating. It's so out and kind of quirky, and you really see his brain and how he approaches the instrument. But yeah, so Kenwood, I think he's still at Berkeley. I'm not sure, but he's another one. He has set up kits where he hangs keyboards off the sides of his throne, and he'll play drums with one hand and play keyboards, kind of vertically with his other hand. It's like D'Antoni Parks. You see doing a version of that. What they did with it were 2 totally different things. But and again, Josh Dion, people who they're the ones where I'm like, it's not fair. Like you're way too talented. I
kind of fuck you, but yeah.
Right. Well, yeah. Like you're my favorite drummer with one hand, and then you have to go and do that and make a solo. Him and Nate, and I put them in another category.
As you should, yeah.
Right. And I just kind of go, thank God you do that, so I don't have to. Right.
That's a good perspective. Yeah.
Well, at another
making
time,
my life easier.
Right. It was funny because I used to be, and I think a lot of us, we go through these periods sometimes where, especially if you're into the muso type stuff, if you're in New York going to the 55 bar, people are just hovering up above the ground at these levels of musicianship that are just wild. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty common for other musicians who are coming up or just in any part of their journey to look at that and be like, oh God, more for the to-do list. It's like that. Oh, this exists now too. Whereas when I was younger and I would go to clinics, I remember seeing Dennis Chambers and Mike Mangini do a clinic at the Long Island Drum Center, and those experiences were pure inspiration, where you were, this thing was happening in front of you, and you got to meet them, and the pixie dust fell on your shoulders, and you ran home and you practiced, and that would last for a week or so, right? And it was truly inspiring, and you didn't have the sort of checklist in your head. You didn't have the same hang-ups or neuroses, maybe. But I remember,
neuroses.
Yeah. I got all of them. But it's your level of self-awareness there that helps, navigate that stuff to one degree or another. But I remember there was a time when I was sort of out of that scene, like downtown New York, not really seeing a lot of guys play as much. And my buddy was like, hey, Carlock's playing with Wayne Krantz at this, not the 55 Bar, this other place in Brooklyn, this tiny little jazz club called The Rose. It's gone now. And we went, and there was like 15 people there. They were playing on the floor. And for the first time, I was able to enjoy it, because I wasn't doing the math in my head. I wasn't deconstructing what he was doing. I wasn't then putting that up against what I could do and kind of grading myself against that. It wasn't this aspirational thing. It was just Keith and Tim LaFave and Wayne raging. And I just let myself enjoy it and let myself listen to it. And we walked out, and I was like, thank God for Keith. Like, he does that so I don't have to do it and I can actually enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
And it's, like that was a real, that was another turning point, like for me, where you can allow yourself to enjoy things without your ego or your insecurities kind of getting caught up with it. And I feel like a lot of us, especially now with the internet, we don't have to go to a show. We could just open Instagram. And, for me, where I am now, I could look at it and still enjoy it and say, oh, wow, that is so cool that guy can do that. Like, who's that guy? Riccardo Merlini, Italian guy with insane hands. Just like...
Yes.
Unbelievable. And I look at that, and I'm a technique guy, right? And Riccardo, if you're out there, respect, man.
Mm-hmm.
I'm comfortable enough in my playing and where I am, and I don't have use for that technique in what I do. Yep. So I can really appreciate it for purely what it is and what he does with it, right? Whereas, again, there was a time where I would have looked at him and been like, ordering that video, like, I'm gonna really beat myself up over this. But
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot more that I'm better at being fine at not being good at. It's just like, that's just not what I want to do, but that's fucking awesome.
Right, exactly. And I think a lot of us in general, we get hung up or we'll, just because I say I'm not into this person or it's not for me, doesn't mean it's bad. It's just not for me. And so, but getting back to the Spaceo track, so it's kind of with Denard. And the first time I heard this, I was cutting class. Sorry, Mom. In high school. I think it was around my sophomore year. And I was at a buddy's house, O'Donnell Lee. If you're listening, OD, respect. With a handful of friends. And this song just came on. And when it dropped, my body just started moving uncontrollably. Like it just hit me like a truck. It had this weight to it, right? Mm-hmm. And it was like this heaviness that I'd only kind of got from like more aggressive heavy music before. And again, it was like this confusing thing where it's like, how is this all happening? So from here, it was just really like mining everything that was remotely funky, right, in my life. And again, you look back to the 5 to 10 year old, that was sort of the theme there, right? It was this thing, mm-hmm. It was in there and it's coming back out in a new way. So immediately it was like James Brown, JB's, The Meters, P-Funk, Herbie Hancock, Tower Power, the Gap Band, Zapp and Roger, Go-Go, coming out of DC, like Trouble Funk, and those guys. I was just looking for every genus of funk music that there was. And it was fun. And again, it's funny, like the way my kid finds music, it is just so wildly different now. He has access to all these things at any given time. And because that, his musical DNA is so much richer. Now, how that relates back to the industry and how musicians make money, that'll be for another podcast. We could talk about that.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope to even, exactly.
And it's something I've been very involved in. But, at this point, we're also in like kind of the golden age of hip hop, like kind of careening into the shiny suit era, right? Like sure. Puffy and Mace and all that. And
the shiny suit era, yeah.
Oh, it was great. But, growing up in New York, hip hop is around. You know, you have Hot 97, you have all these things happening. So it's just around. You know, it's pop music, or it's on its way to becoming pop music. They're not calling it rap anymore, and that's a big distinction. So that was having an influence on me. Who was I listening to? You know, later in high school, obviously Biggie, you know, Jay-Z, EPMD, De La Soul, Gangstar, like Premier, you know, all that stuff was happening, but really all going into the same bucket as all this other kind of funk that I was listening to. And, you know, if you listen to P-Funk and Zapp and Roger, and then you listen to Dre, you're like, oh, that's the through line there. That's literally the sample, right? It's all right there. You know, from funk, I inevitably found fusion and all the different species that are there. You know, maybe we'll have Aaron Sterling, you know, do a flow chart of that with some commentary.
I've been having fun with those. Yeah, that was cool.
He's I just die. I just watch it on repeat. It's so perfect. But yeah, and that was exciting because fusion was kind of bringing in more of an intellectual component, right, to funk that was a little maybe less heady. But there, it was the usual suspects. So Lenny White, you know, the Weather Report guys, Billy Cobham, all those things, and really listening to that and figuring out, like, why do I like this but not that, right? You know, it's like, why do I like, you know, Weather Report but not Spyro Gyra, right? Equal, the musicianship is equally up there, but kind of plowing through that into the contemporary stuff like Chick Corea Electric Band, and you know, when it gets a little, you know, smooth jazz here at times. Again, shout out to Fusion Fridays. Kim Plainfield, who I studied with at the Drummers Collective, he had a name for this kind of drumming. He called it Sophistafunk. And he actually, in his book, you know, that he did for the collective, and Kim passed a few years ago, but he has a formula for it, right? So it's kind of an algorithm, and you kind of put it through this filter to turn it into, it's like a formula for Sophistafunk, right? So you could take a basic groove that is like 2 and 4s here, the hi-hats here, the kick drums here, and you put it through this meat grinder, and out comes the funkiest thing you've ever heard. It's really cool. So if anyone's out there wants to check that out.
So that's public, Googleable something? Yeah, it's out there? It's
in the Carl Fisher book. He did one, Advanced Concepts, that's his first one, and then the second one he did for the collective. But yeah, this time, like Dave Garibaldi, you know, it was like Mike and Dave, East Bay, those were my guys. And just constantly, and they have their own take on that thing, right?
Sure.
It's actually, it's similar in composition some ways, but influenced in different ways. You know, I think Dave was listening to more Afro-Cuban stuff, and Mike was listening to more jazz. They were both listening to everything, but the way they were composing and playing through it was different. But yeah, so I graduated high school in '96. You know, I went to University of Oregon. I was going for music.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So,
I used to live in Corvallis for a while, so we used to go to Eugene all the time. Yeah, man.
Cowtown?
Yeah. It was. Yeah, that was like we'd go hang out with our more free living friends in Eugene, and then we'd go back to Corvallis where all the business students were. So
that's a great euphemism. There was a lot of free living going on there. But yeah, so I was in Eugene, and I went for music. Charles Dowd was running the percussion department, so the Funky Primer, the Funky Thesaurus.
Sure.
And he was kind of excited that a kid from New York would want to come out and study music out there. But if I'm being honest, it was like, I played all through high school in bands and did different stuff and was good. You know, I was, even in New York, I was a big fish in a small pond in my area. And, you know, there are these moments when you kind of get out of your zone. Like, you know, you go audition for the All County Jazz Ensemble and you're in New York, my guy. Like, there are murderers, like, everywhere. And I remember sitting, you know, you're waiting to go into audition. You're, like, in the bullpen. And just hearing the kids go in before me, and I was like, what am I doing here? And that was really just a product of geographically the level of the talent where I was. You know, New York, we talk about Houston, right? All those guys coming out of there. And now I think it's a little less cut and dried in regards to where folks come from. And I think you get pockets of people. You get kind of these buckets, these squads, that'll come out of different places at different times. But yeah, so it was funny going into school. I wasn't even sure. I was like, I guess I'll do music. It's what I'm best at. So let's just go. But I started as a performance major, but it became clear very quickly that wasn't for me, right? I really just wanted to play drum set. Like, I didn't want to play, like 4 mallet fugues. And it showed, right? So, at some point, Charles was like, look, your drum set playing is 4 years ahead of everything else. And you can hang and try to get the rest up there, but I don't think it's going to be fun for either of us. And, at the time it was heartbreaking because I was just like, oh, this was sort of the idea. Like, what do I do? Looking back, it's the best thing that ever happened. I wound up minoring in music, doing the core, like sight singing theory, repertoire, like all that stuff. And
thank you for correcting yourself on that.
Oh yeah. But there was a couple funny things that happened, in that time that kind of pushed me to where I was eventually was going to go. In the core curriculum, there was that repertoire class. And I remember the first day in the lecture, this was wild. The professor had someone read the definition of music out of a textbook, right? And after the student did that, the professor said, and I quote, "So by definition, hip hop isn't music." And like all these people laughed. And I was just sitting there with my buddy who was from Boston. We looked at each other and I was like, yeah, nah, I'm out. Like this is culturally so far from any understanding. It was almost offensive, to me. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if there's any folks out there that agree with that, that's fine. That is your opinion, but to have that inside the industrial, education complex, I was like, I'm paying for this.
Yeah. On the first day, I'm gonna close your mind right off the bat. It's like, okay.
Exactly. So again, the program wasn't contemporary. We weren't at the new school, right? It wasn't this thing that was really pushing in a progressive manner. But yeah, I wound up minoring for 2 years, focused more on philosophy, sociology, things like that. A lot of thinking, playing in bands with my friends. And at the time, there were all these bands coming through town, or we'd go up to Portland, Crystal Ballroom, that's where we saw a lot of stuff. But it was, there were these regional bands. There's this band called Rubberneck, and this drummer named Brian Foxworth, who was like Dennis. He was just unbelievable. And I used to go see them at frat parties. And I was like, what do you do? Like, why don't you get out of the Pacific Northwest? And they're like, there's no money, man. Like, this is great. like we're doing good. Stanton Moore, Galactic would come through. There's a band called the Grey Boy All-Stars, Zach Nager, Carl Denson, killing, like kind of Boogaloo, Grant Green style stuff. And then there was some other weirder stuff. So that's like, we were in earshot of Seattle. So like Critters Buggin', like Matt Chamberlain and Skerrick would come down. And that was totally wild. But yeah, like as that was happening, I was sort of like, you know what? I want to do music, not this way. I should probably go back to New York. So that's sort of this, where are we at, like 15 to 20? Yeah, 15 to 20 years old. That was sort of what was happening in there. But that was all started and all powered by this Maceo stuff. And that led me down that rabbit hole. But this is a 10-minute song, so you're only going to hear the beginning.
I know, it's like for copyright reasons, I wish I could, because a lot of these great drummers tell a story with their playing, but it's just a little clip, a little glimpse. So yeah, this is Pass the Peas by Maceo Parker. Here we go.
Pass the peas, pass the peas, pass the peas. I like we used to say it. Ooh, pass the peas, pass the peas, pass the peas. I like we used to say it. Come on, pass the peas, pass the peas, pass the peas. I like we used to say it. Ooh, pass the peas, what? Pass the peas. Come on, pass the peas. Hold on, pass.
I love how he focuses the one, like he definitely puts an emphasis on the one so much. It's so cool. It's so apparent, like genre.
And that's, I mean, coming down on the one, right?
Yeah.
But the weight. I'm trying not to use the P word too much in this, in this podcast, because I feel like as soon as you say pocket, it could mean a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people, and everyone can argue about that in the comments. But it's the weight, right? And it's the space, how wide. Actually, in the Mike Clark and Paul Jackson instructional video, they talk about how wide is your pocket. We're creating this thing together. It's not a point on the grid. It's not, you can't find it. It's something you create. And you could hear that, right? Like Kenwood's Time, how he's creating this thing. It creates gravity. Like it really does this thing psychoactively. I can only imagine what it was like being at that show, because it's just, that whole song is just a party. And you hear they quote P-Funk tunes. They quote all these other things. Maceo played with P-Funk. He played with Prince. He did all this stuff. Fred Wesley's on there as well. Larry Golding's another absolute killer organist. But yeah, that was what sent me down into just Funkland, which is hip hop, which is breakbeats, which is all these things. And it also just playing it, again, it was, I remember when I was at school at the Drummers Collective, I was out sick for the whole kind of funk portion. The teacher was Vince Cherico. And, at the end, you do a rhythm section with professional players. And I missed the whole thing, and I just came in for the rhythm section and was hanging hard, right? And it was just because this is what you love. This is what I loved. You could call any tune, and I would have been in heaven. And my straight ahead classes, not so much. I was not a great straight ahead jazz player. I still am not a great straight ahead jazz player. People see me play jungle and assume I play bop, or stuff like that, and that is 100% not the case. This isn't to say that I don't enjoy it, listening to it.
But just the way you air drum, I can tell you can play jazz a little bit. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, he's good.
This is the international sign for jazz, right? This is go. This is stop. This is jazz right there. When it's down here, it's marching, right? But when it's up
absolutely.
here, yeah.
Oh yeah, basic safety right there.
Yeah, man. So,
Yeah. Just for the sake of time, let's move on to number 4. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a song called Terrorists. Artist is called Renegade, also known as Ray Keith. Real big drum and bass producer from, back then we called it Jungle. This came out in 1993, so years of like 20 to 25. I had moved back from Oregon. I was living in my parents' house, just experiencing crushing existential dread. I was like, okay, what's next? All my friends in the area were pretty much gone. Everyone's at school or whatever. I got a job at Sam Ash in the drum department, and actually met a bunch of people through that job and through folks in my network who were just still around. And I wound up starting to go to raves and parties in the area, which was totally foreign for me. Nothing I had ever experienced. And I remember walking into like my first outlaw rave, and it just felt dangerous. It was closer to, when I was in the hardcore scene for however long on Long Island back in the day, it was closer to that. It's like you might get clocked in the face at any second. Not, there wasn't that physical thing, like impending doom, but it felt exciting in the same way. And the music really wasn't anything I had heard before in any real way, but it was the culture that really excited me. When I say culture, I'm not referring to like the stereotypical hedonism that we associate with rave culture or nightlife. For me, it was more like everyone was there to dance and have a good time, right? It was totally removed from the kind of standard music culture where like the band is here and the audience is here and we do this and sometimes we clap.
Show me something. Yeah.
Show me something. I'm standing here with my arms crossed. I paid a lot of money for this. So as a musician, there weren't musicians really at these things. You had DJs, you had producers, you had people who were club goers, punters, as they say in the UK. So there really weren't. There'd be live acts every now and then, but they weren't really bands. So, and the other thing was, you couldn't find most of this music outside of a 12-inch vinyl format. Like, you couldn't go to Tower Records and find this jungle tune where 100 records were pressed, in South London, and we got 20 of them in New York, and then 20 DJs got those. So sometimes these guys were spinning dub plates, right? So, which I call the original NFTs, right? There are these one-off pressings that are similar to test presses, except they're not cut on actual vinyl, so you can only play them a certain number of times before they would get unlistenable, right? Unplayable. So that was almost like a disappearing message, right? So there is this, and that came from reggae culture. Like, dub plates are very common, even to this day in some places. But, again, like, you had to go into the culture to find this music, and you couldn't even own it. Like, this is before cell phone recordings and all this stuff. If you wanted to hear a song, you had to be in this club when this DJ was brought over, because he was the only person who had it. And we'd be on message boards, and they'll be like, "Oh, Dylan just dropped this new dub, blah, 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 blah." And you're like, and you're so jealous of your friend who got to hear it, not even own it. Like, and in those moments, you wind up being so much more present because of the scarcity of this thing. And you're so much more inside the experience, right? Because it's the scarcity that's there. And I loved that. It was so exciting. And the music itself, at most parties, you have the main room, big room, which is like mostly 4-on-the-floor house, techno, things like that. And then the side room, like the little room, was where like jungle and breaks and other weird stuff would happen. So I remember walking into the jungle room for the first time, and it was like total chaos, right? It was just this massive bass just hitting you in your chest, and the beats were frenetic, and it seemed like the drums were like this giant composed part. It wasn't just like 2 and 4. It was closer to Indian classical music. It was close to tabla in some way. And yeah, again, confused, like delighted, like have no idea what's going on, but there was this aggressive component, there was this funky component, there was this intelligent part of it. And it was all coming together in this culture that was here for it. It was people were dancing to this stuff and losing their minds. And that was it for me. I was just like, I need to put this in my veins at all times. I became friends with more DJs and producers, because again, that was sort of the only way you could get a lot of this music. There were, later on, you could use the internet and find things. And I remember seeing the first cell phone recordings pop up in message boards, and there were these horribly distorted MP3s that didn't sound like anything, but that was kind of revolutionary. In New York, you could go and see drum bass 7 nights a week. There were 7 weekly parties, and then one-off parties, and then this, and then that, and it was incredible. The first time I heard the song Terrorist, it just had all the active ingredients. It had the complexity, but it had a simple song form. Everything just sat perfectly, and it really stuck with me. But at the same time, I was working at Sam Ash in retail. This guy, Alan Asuncion, he walked in. He's a drummer, incredible drummer. He worked on De La Guardia. He was on Stomp for a while here in New York. And he just picked up a stick and started doing this thing with his hand on a pad. It was this kind of Moeller stuff. And I was like, what is this black magic that you bring in front of me? And he's like, oh, that's just some JoJo stuff. And I had no idea who Jojo Mayer was, right?
Yeah. What's a JoJo?
What's a JoJo, right? He had been in New York since like the late 80s, but so I'm just like, what are you doing? So he's telling me about these drummers who were playing jungle live in the city at a place called the Izzy Bar. So he took me there one night. I wasn't even 21. I had a fake ID, right? So the night we went, Zach Danziger was playing with Boomish, which was Tim LaFave, him and Tim LaFave. Amir Ziv was opening with his band Droid. And I had known Zach through his work with Wayne Krantz and all the fusion stuff. 2 Drink Minimum, Whippersnapper, that was my shit forever. But this was just different. And the basement of this place hold maybe 50 or 60 people. So you're like sardines and this total insanity is happening on this tiny stage that's like a foot off the ground. After that, I would go see JoJo play at his party. It was called Prohibited Beats. And I remember just standing there being like, what does it feel like to be able to do that? Like, it looked like the sickest ride at Six Flags. You know, and for me, loving this music and not even knowing it was possible that a human being could do it, again, like, my brain broke. I reevaluated everything in my life that was going on and just set up camp. And it was this really magical time in New York for music, at least for me. You know, there was this handful of guys exploring this music. So JoJo, Zach, Amir, Yuval Gabay, who played in Soul Coughing. He was doing drum bass stuff. D'Antoni, you know, was doing stuff. But the coolest part was that everyone had their own take on it, right? And there was no one way to do it, and there were no rules. Like, everyone was just getting there. And, you know, some people used electronics, some people didn't. You know, some people were chopsy, some people weren't. You know, the way Yuval did it, it was this very meat and potatoes thing. It wasn't coming from fusion like some other people were. And it was incredible. He used the North drum as a snare. It was wild.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was. I'll find a picture of it and send it to you. It was so out of control. But yeah. So around this time, I enrolled in the Drummers Collective. I studied with Kim, Michael Lauren, Frank Katz, Fred Klatz, Vince Jericho, Pete Retzlaff, Memo Acevedo, and Jim Chapin. Right. So all this stuff is converging at the same time. One day I had a lesson with Frank Katz, and he's like, he knew I was trying to get into this hand stuff. I was studying with Chapin. And I was getting pretty good at it, right? The little JoJo finger thing.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And he goes, hey, I got someone who wants to meet you. And I'm like, all right. And he takes me to this room, and I open the door, and it's Mike Clark. He's like, hey, man, how you doing? I heard you can do that thing. And I'm like, this is my hero. You know, this is
He's
like...
run out.
I was like, you want me to show you this thing? You know, it's like, I could do it with my left hand, kind of like Buddy, but I've never seen it match grip. And it was just surreal, you know, and after that, like, we were hanging, and then me, Frank, and Mike, and a couple other guys went down to this Buddhist center, and we chanted for a half hour straight. Yeah, and he's telling us the way he played Actual Proof, and why it's called Actual Proof. They were trying to get this thing happening, so he went and chanted for 20 minutes straight, came out, nailed the take, you know, and it was... all these things happening and really just changing the way I approached all this stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. So
did you tell him, like, the reason why I got to want to learn these hand stuff started with God Made Me Funky? Did you bring that up to him?
I was like, I didn't even know what to say. You know, I was just trying to be cool. Like, I was just gonna be like, yeah, man, like, trying not to fanboy, but like just exploding inside.
You're doing it wrong.
Right. Like, but there was another funny thing that happened. So JoJo played this thing. We had this thing called the Sam Ash. What was it? The Sam Ash Drum Expo, and it was in. You ever been to Hammerstein, the Manhattan Center,
no.
in New York? So we were having this drum expo. So where GA would be was like the sales floor, and we had all these kind of booths. It was almost like a mini PASIC or something. And then on the stage, they would have clinics throughout the day. So it was like Virgil Donati, a few other people, and JoJo was one of those people. So I was working at Sam Ash at the time. Okay, I need to do a disclaimer. Anyone listening, don't ever do anything like this. This is not cool, okay, by most standards, but it's a funny story, so I wanted to bring it up because I don't even think JoJo knows it, so maybe he'll hear this.
Sure.
So I saw he was coming to this thing, and I was gonna be on the sales floor. So I emailed him, like, on the email on his site. I said, hey, this is Guy. I work at Sam Ash. I've been assigned to be your personal drum tech for the day. So just let me know, when you come in, just let me know, find me, and I'll take care of you. And he writes back, oh, hey, man, that's so cool. He's like, I'll be bringing my drum tech, Marcus, that day, but it'll be great to have, a little extra help. I was like, we're rolling the dice. Like, let's see what happens.
That's awesome.
I'm on the sales floor with all my, coworkers and all this stuff. JoJo rolls in, goes to the stage manager, who's my manager, and goes, hey, where's Guy? And he's like, he's over there. And I see him wave, and I just ran up and grabbed his drums. And and went to go start setting
I'll
him
take
up.
care of
that.
this. Yeah.
Right.
Don't
Right.
even-
And that was that. And that's how we kind of really met and got to know each other. It was all through false pretenses. But yeah, so I don't recommend doing that, but it worked out in this case. Yeah. So, after that, I kept going to parties and seeing JoJo play, and one day he came up to me and said, "Hey man, you're at every show." And I'm like, yeah, I am. And he's like, "Do you have a car?" And I said, yes. And he said, "Do you want to be my drum tech?" And I said, yes. And then he said, "Okay, well, I could pay you or I could just give you lessons." And I was like, "Lessons." And at that time, he wasn't teaching privately, so it was like, this is an insane opportunity. Like, I have access to the Dead Sea Scrolls, like, right now. Around this time, I moved to Brooklyn, got a job at Manny's. This is another funny sidebar. I swear we'll get back to the music. But this is all informed, by this stuff.
Dude, do your thing.
So I walked into Manny's. I go to the drum department, and who's standing behind the counter? Carter McLean, a young Carter McLean.
Oh.
So that's how we met. And we worked together on 48th Street. Greg Fox wound up working there as well. And, he studied with me a little bit way back then. Mark Giuliani used to come in. This is when he was either still at William Patterson or just coming out. I think he had just gotten the Abishai Cohen gig. It's just so funny to look back at all this and the people we would meet that came through those doors, legends. It was like, again, cultural influences, like all the big pop guys, like Brian Fraser Moore would come in, John Blackwell will come in, Idris Muhammad, Artemis Pyle from Lynyrd Skynyrd, Thomas Hackett. Like, I can rattle through so many. Steve Jordan walks in. I remember sitting there, JoJo and John Riley were at the shop at the same time, showing each other how they do groups of 5 on a ride cymbal with one hand, and like explaining their approaches to stuff. And you just got to be around it. You were working retail, but it was just like, you would not have run into this any other way. So it was kind of a magical time. But
it reminds me of that book, Meet Me in the Bathroom, which is, like the Strokes and LCD, all that stuff. It's almost, you should write a book about that time in New York City of all these drummers.
Oh my God, it was wild. Meet Me in the Bathroom. I mean, I was I was working with some DFA artists around shortly after that, in and around that time. So a lot of those things, I read through it. Justine D is featured in that a lot, and I went to a bunch of her parties. But it was like, it's really funny to see it through somebody else's eyes, because we're just going out,
Totally, yeah.
But,
it's kind of what it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, but at that time, I was going out. I was looking for opportunities to play in the city. I would have been just happy playing the music I wanted to play, but I was going to auditions and all that stuff. Got a call from the Drummers Collective. JoJo recommended me to, teach the hip hop and drum and bass program there, which was very cool. Had a bunch of incredible players like come through that program. Then I got a call from a guy named Kirk Gluck, who I knew from the drum and bass scene. He's a producer and label boss he had done a record with Bill Laswell, and they wanted to do that live. I don't know how many people know who Bill is. It's kind of this binary thing. You either absolutely know who this dude is, or you have no idea who he is. He's produced over 700 records. Okay. So Bill, the biggest thing you might know that he did, and the thing that kind of launched him, was he produced Herbie Hancock Rocket. But he's worked with, oh my God, so many people. Lemmy, the Motorhead guys. He did an Iggy Pop record. Tabla Beat Science is another one a lot of drummers might know. That was with Kirsch Kale and Zakir Hussain and a bunch of other people. He did a bunch of Miles Davis remixes. Incredible. Like him and JoJo are sort of like my Yoda and my Obi-Wan, right? Like, someone teaches you how to wield a lightsaber and the other one teaches you the power of the Force. And those are those two things kind of coming together. But yeah, it was killer. So with Bill, I was at a bunch of different projects there, one of which I got to play with Bernie Worrell, who passed a few years back. But that was surreal. That was P-Funk. Like, that was another one of those moments where it's like, I remember on our first gig, he was tuning the Moog, and he started playing the bass line from Flashlight, and I just left my body. I was just like, this is the pure thing. Like, it's happening right now. I really miss him. He was just a whole universe. But there I got to play with John Zorn and Laurie Anderson. I did a gig with Bill and Mike Patton. Crazy things. And a lot of those things were super free, super avant-garde things. And I got there through studying this electronic music. I didn't get there listening to free jazz, which I enjoy, in a different way, but I got there because I was doing something totally different. And that was nerve-wracking at sometimes, because like that imposter syndrome, like, what am I doing here? Right? Like, what is... And I remember saying, Bill, what's the plan? He goes, you just do what you do. I'm like, thanks, Yoda. Like, this is, you're not helping. But it was always a ton of growth that came out of, getting pushed into the deep end like that. So another one of my students was Leah Shapiro from Black Rebel. She wrecked me for a gig. She was friends with the producer, this guy named John Hill, and he was working with Santa Gold. And they needed a drummer who could play electronic stuff. And it's in my wheelhouse, because I could do that. But after that gig, that brought me into sort of more mainstream indie electronic stuff. Some of that stuff wound up going on to majors. But that kind of became my calling card, where if you don't want to have to be using tons of triggers and 24 channels of playback, this guy might be able to do a chunk of that, and it feels right. My friends used to call me Guy Borg, right? That was sort of it's just like bury the click, make it feel, not even make it feel good, make it feel right. Make it feel a little more metronomic, understand where you could stretch and do these things.
I like that. Don't make it feel good, make it feel right.
Right. Make it feel appropriate, right?
Yeah.
For that thing. And yeah, then I was playing in the Pitchfork Band of the Week, for about 5 or 6 years. Those things just kept going. I played in a band called Hercules and Love Affair. They were on DFA. Who else? A guy named Drop the Line. He had his own label. He was on Ultra for a second. I played with Cold Cave. So Wes from American Nightmare, the Boston hardcore band. What else? School of Seven Bells. It's my wife's old band. They're on Ghostly. I played a couple gigs with Head Automatica. I knew Daryl from Long Island. So it was a mixed bag. I was getting called for sessions. It was fun. I did something with Graham Haynes. That's Roy's son. He plays trumpet. And he is Marcus Gilmore's uncle. So Marcus was on that session. I think an 18-year-old Marcus Gilmore, and we were like kind of trading different tracks. And I just remember being like, this dude is terrifying. And and again, it was one of those things like, why are we both in the same room on this on this thing? We did different things. So that was another cool thing. Who else? RAC, Chick Chick Chick, Willie Scratch Perry, Shakira. I played on the theme to the 2010 World Cup. That's sort of the one.
That's a nice little drop there.
Right. That's the one everyone would know. But the Waka Waka song, that's me on that. And that was John, who had produced Santi, Santa Gold. He was working on Shakira's new record, and this call came in. All the big labels do bids with FIFA, and so like you can go into the server and see like, oh, this is the Black Eyed Peas submission, this is that, and there was this really basic demo that was down. She co-wrote it with this group Freshly Ground from South Africa, but it was like the demo-iest of the demos, and we put this groove together, and the whole point was it can't try to be anything, right? It needs to truly be like a fusion of all these things, because that was in the spirit of the cut, right? So we wound up, if you listen to the parts, and I call it robo-tracking, right? So where you're doing the kick and snare separate, so you could affect them and then play the hats, multi-track the hats. So that was like a soca kick and snare line. That was a straight sort of Tony Allen Afrobeat kind of hi-hat pattern, kind of Brazilian triangles, all this stuff. And we went in and we submitted it, and we felt good. Didn't think it would do what it did, but it did. Yeah. And it's like, it's funny. It's like whenever, if like I'm at a new dentist or something, and they're like, oh, you on anything I know? I'm like, yeah, you probably know this song. They're like, oh, my kids love that. And I was like, yes. It's pretty popular. But
yeah. Well, maybe I'll start off the episode with that song, but let's just let's go back. Let's make sure I do play a terrorist.
Yeah, get into it.
And then we can go on to number 5.
Cool.
Do you know what the actual sample or what that's sampled from?
That's the amen break.
It is the amen break.
Yeah, so there's two grooves going on there. So the big one is the amen break, and I think it's think is the other one that comes in. I'm pretty sure you just chopped that up, but you hear why I love this track so much. There's components of, you know, what would be kind of the most classic boilerplate drum and bass components, jungle components. So you have the amen break. You hear that intertwining of the other break beat kind of working polyrhythmically against it. That first bass you hear, it's called a Reese bass. And then you hear that other subby bass line coming in kind of under it. And it all just dovetails together in this really cool form, right? And it's composed. That was always one of my favorite parts of it. But it just hits. Like hearing that pattern and that big me and Adam Betts talk about this stuff a lot, you know, because these are the bits, you know, we both of us were in the rave caves, you know, experiencing this stuff in this way. We've chatted a lot about how that stuff influenced us versus how other people get to it. And again, neither good nor bad, but when you experience it like kind of culturally, when you get it through that, it hits different, you know, and it just kind of it slips into your playing when you're playing other stuff different ways.
I don't mean to rush you at all. I do have to leave probably in about 15 minutes to get ready because we have sprinter call to get to the venue. But let's go to number 5.
Cool. So Burial, Southern Comfort. This came out on the self-titled in 2006. So I'm like between 25 and 30. So at this point, grime and dubstep was coming over to the US slowly, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of living in the space where jungle used to be. Jungle was, in drum and bass, was more mainstream. You'd hear it in main rooms. It was its own thing. I mean, in the UK, it was on the radio. You know, that's the other thing that I think a lot of people don't understand. It's pop music over there. But it wasn't the dubstep we know today. You know, the term EDM didn't exist, right? It wasn't, you know, Skrillex and big gigantic drops and all these things. It was super minimal. So this is the early days. These, you know, artists like Mala, Scream, you know, into Scream, Banga. It's the sound that was coming out of Croydon, you know, which is a suburb of London. And at the time, you know, 2005, 2006, I was getting into this. French House was coming over kind of at the same time. So like Justice.
Yeah, sure.
You listen? Yeah, that was the Ed Banger label. Justice, Sebastian, Busy P. And Justice kind of blew my head off too at the time. They were doing their take on funk in their way as well, and it was like if the Gap Band ran everything through a set of Marshall stacks, you know. It's just this furry, like, explosive stuff. It was just heavy and brutal and funky. I remember the first Justice show in Brooklyn. They dropped their single, was it Waters of Nazareth? And this dude next to me, he did one of those Motley Crue, take a gulp of your beer and spit it directly into the air things. And I was like, what in God's name is happening here? This is insane. Like, it was like a rock show. But then Burial happened, and it's garage, it's dubstep, it's kind of like almost like Primus in that it lives in its own universe. There's actually a really good documentary on YouTube you could watch. It's called Why All My Friends Hate Skrillex. I don't hate Skrillex, but that's the title.
You gotta, it's provocative.
Yeah, you know, and Sonny, another one, you know, he came out of hardcore. It's interesting. He was in From First to Last, you know, so. But it talks about how dubstep evolved, like, in London and through there, and there's this great section on Burial. And I remember hearing this stuff, and it felt like a city. You know, it felt like memories. It felt like New York. You know, obviously he's coming from London. They use the word hauntology, right, which is close to like retrofuturism. You know, it felt like a memory of something, of a future that never came, right? I'm getting out there now.
Oh, that's cool. But, that's a cool concept to even kind of, you know, pontificate on, yeah.
Yeah, but this had elements of all these things I love that were put together in a new way. You know, when I listened to the drums, I heard Tony Allen. I heard elements of jungle. I heard cinematic things. It's Foley. Like, he takes a lot of his drum sounds from video games. So like a sword unsheathing in Assassin's Creed, right? A Bic lighter flicking, all these things. And it was sexy. You know, it had this sheen over it. It was really, it just hit me. And then I went to go try to play it. And it's not easy. You know, there's this swing to it, and it's not on the grid. So the way he programs, the way he produces, he does it all in SoundForge, which is a wave editor. So he'll take his samples, not on a grid, and just kind of butt them up against each other until they sound the way he wants them to sound. So like a 4-bar drum groove will be all these individual things, not on the grid, just kind of a shape. And then he'll copy and paste those in a row and put it all together. So it's sort of like if you were to, it's similar to through composing, you know, a beat on the grid without quantizing it. But it just created this aesthetic overall that just hits me. And to this day, I try to emulate it, and it's so difficult to do. But it comes out sounding human, and it's swing in this new way, it's funk in this new way. But yeah, man, let's roll the tape.
Yeah, it's cool just to touch on that point, because I think we talked a little bit. Brody Simpson was like, you know, if you do something that's a little off but repeat it, that becomes its own grid, and that's why there's some drummers that don't technically sound like they're these amazing drummers, but because they have this thing that they continuously do, it's a pocket, and it makes sense.
Well, right. Pocket is something you create, right? It's you know, you bookend it however you do. We talk about people who play off the grid. You look at Chris Dave and Zach. He can do that too, right? He sort of has, he's like a cross between,
right, for listeners. Yeah.
Yes, he's, you know, kind of a cross between a drum machine and Jack DeJohnette at times, right? It's these things which shouldn't make sense, but you know, sometimes he's off the grid, and sometimes I'll listen really deeply and I'm like, oh no, that's just a 30-second note that's displaced. Like it's actually on there. I just can't grok it. You know, my ears aren't attuned to that level of minutia. But some people sublimate. You know, they transcend all of it. And when you could do it within a groove, that's really special to me. I remember talking to Tim LaFave once, and I was like, what's it like playing with Zach? He's like, it's hard, man. He was joking, but he was like, yeah, no, you got to count. Like, he knows where he is all the time, and he's always going to come back. And whether he gives you a big one or he's on the E of 3, he always knows where he is. So to make it work, you know, you have to strap in and
that'd
do
be
this
stressful.
stuff. Yeah, but
all right. So here's Southern Comfort by Burial.
Cool.
That's so cool. And of course, listeners, please listen to the whole song. I only played 1.5 of the 5 minutes of that song.
It's a killer. Yeah. I immediately go into this place, you know, whenever I hear it. That's my walking back to the subway at 2 a.m., you know, Manhattan to Brooklyn. That's always what's going on. It's my theme music. When I would listen to it, just breaking it down, because the sound design is so deep, right? Like how he's getting those sounds and how do I reproduce, again, a sword being unsheathed. And once you know where the sounds are coming from, you're kind of like, Oh, I kind of wish I didn't know, because maybe I would have just gotten there faster. Like I would have stacked this on top of this and that would have sounded like that. The rim click sound is like so heavy. And the groove itself kind of lays on its side. It's displaced to a degree, but yeah, burial's kind of my religion. I have shirts. Look, I don't have many band shirts, you know.
I mean, along a lot of the same lines that we're discussing, Richard Spaven was on the show maybe 3 months ago, and
Love him.
Archangel was his burial song that was a huge influence on him. So for listeners, go listen to that one as well, because Burial is it's a band that I'm not super familiar with, but apparently it's one of those bands that, you know, spawned a lot of amazing players.
Oh yeah, and he's super private. Like this isn't a guy, no one's ever seen him really. But he's worked with Tom York, and that was by choice. He wanted to be as private as possible, and that made people want to know more and more about him. But it's super influential for a lot of guys. I feel like more drummers should hear this and feel it, especially because it's using swing as a device in a really interesting way, in not a tang-dang-a-dang kind of way. Again, I feel like closer to Tony Allen, you know, in that sense. But he wasn't listening to either of those things when he was making this stuff.
Yeah. Swing is a subdivision, not a genre of music. You know, it's a
sure.
Well, unfortunately, I am out of time, but I'm just gonna say to be continued. Yes. And I will talk to you soon, man.
Dude, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Dude, this was awesome, man. Thank you.
I'm glad you dug it. And yeah, travel safe. And
thanks, man.
Yeah, enjoy.
And that's the show. Be sure to subscribe, and if you're listening on a platform that allows for ratings or reviews, do that. It helps more people find the show, which means the show will get better and bigger, and hopefully I'll have a chance to sell out one day. But you'd be an OG listener that could brag to all your friends. Anyways, also, why don't you go ahead and check out bigfatsnaredrum.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all the socials. Just search for @BigFatSnareDrum and you will find it. This show is edited in part using Isotope RX8 audio editor. It's amazing, so go check that out at isotope.com. Bye.